The ground is not quiet in the Afar depression. Even when the wind drops, even when the heat lies flat across the open earth, the place seems to remember fire. The land is split by faults, lifted and lowered by forces that have been tearing eastern Africa apart for millions of years. Dry gullies cut through pale sediment. Dark volcanic bands lie inside the cliffs like burned pages in a book. Far beyond the horizon, the same deep fracture system continues north and south. A wound in the planet where continents are slowly pulling away from each other. It is a hard place to imagine as gentle, yet buried in this harsh, exposed, sun-white landscape is one of the most intimate clues ever found about the beginning of humanity's story. Not a skull of a king, not a tool of a builder, not a written record, but the broken remains of a small ancient body that once moved through a living world. Long before the name Lucy becomes famous, long before museum lights and glass cases and anniversary lectures, there is only the Afar Earth itself. It holds what most landscapes destroy. Rain, when it comes, arrives with force and then vanishes. Wind carries dust over exposed slopes. Seasonal water cuts into the old beds of streams and lakes. Erosion peels the surface back little by little, revealing fragments that were sealed away before any human city, before agriculture, before fire becomes a familiar companion in camps, before even the genus Homo has fully stepped onto the stage. The Afar does not preserve the past because it is gentle. It preserves because it is restless. It breaks open its own archive. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story ahead is not only about one fossil, it is about how one small skeleton changed the shape of an enormous question. What were we before we were us? To understand why this place matters, the first thing to imagine is time as geology rather than memory. A person remembers in years, a family remembers in generations, a civilization, if it is lucky, remembers in centuries. The Afar remembers in volcanic ash. A layer of ash falls from an eruption, settles over mud, bones, leaves, footprints, floodplains, and shallow water margins. Later it hardens. Minerals inside it begin their silent clock. Above it, new sediment accumulates. Below it, older worlds remain pressed into stone. When scientists find fossils between such layers, the land gives them more than bones. It gives them a position in time. It tells them, with all the caution required in ancient dating, that this creature lived after one volcanic marker and before another, in a field where a few inches of sediment can separate thousands of years. That matters deeply. Lucy's world sits around 3.2 million years in the past, in the Pliocene epoch, a time that feels close only because the older history of life is so enormous. Dinosaurs have already been gone for more than 60 million years. The first flowers, whales, grasses, monkeys, and apes have all entered the world long before her. Yet the world of Lucy is still not the world of people. There are no villages, no roads, no metal, no writing, no remembered names. The sky is familiar, the sun is familiar. The hunger of living bodies is familiar, but the cast of characters is different. Ancient relatives of elephants move through changing habitats. Antelopes and suids browse and graze. Carnivores watch the margins. Monkeys call from wooded places. The landscape is not one simple postcard of open savanna. What survives in the record suggests a shifting mosaic woodland, bushland, river edges, gracier openings, and patches of shade that could change across distance and time. This matters because Lucy is often pulled into a simple picture. A small ape-like ancestor stands up on a flat plain, looks over the grass, and begins the march toward humanity. It is memorable, almost mythic, and far too neat. The real story is stranger and more interesting. Upright walking does not appear as a single heroic decision made under a single burning sky. It emerges in bodies shaped by compromise. It develops among creatures that still carry the memory of trees in their shoulders and arms, while their hips, knees, and feet begin to tell another story. Scholars still debate how much time Lucy's kind spent above the ground, how they moved through branches, how they balanced safety, food, and travel. The evidence remains incomplete, but the incompleteness is part of the power of the fossil. Lucy does not answer everything. She changes which questions can be asked. The Afar Depression is central to that change because it exposes deep time with unusual honesty. In many parts of the world, fossils from this age are hidden under forests, cities, farms, or younger stone. Here, erosion has stripped the cover away. The land appears bare, but its barrenness is deceptive. To a trained eye, a slope of dust and gravel can become a map of vanished habitats. A tooth can signal diet. A fragment of jaw can suggest species. A piece of pelvis can reshape the history of walking. A thin grey band of volcanic tuff can anchor a fossil in time more securely than almost any story passed by word of mouth. The work is slow, and it depends on patience. Most days do not give up a Lucy. Most days give scraps. If anything, an antelope tooth, a shard of turtle shell, a piece of limb bone too weathered to identify at once. Discovery in such a place is not a thunderclap every morning. It is attention repeated until the ground finally speaks. And the ground is selective. It does not preserve the soft parts that would make Lucy feel immediately alive. It keeps no eyes, no skin, no hair, no voice, no memory of breath. It does not tell us what she saw when she turned her head toward movement in the brush, or how her group kept close in a difficult landscape, or what paths became familiar across seasons. It gives bone, position, chemistry, comparison. From these, scientists infer the rest with care. The result is not a complete portrait, but a disciplined haunting. A few dozen pieces of skeleton become enough to reveal that an ancient relative with a small brain walked upright with a body unlike any living ape, and unlike any living human. That is the shock Lucy brings. She is not important because she is the first ancestor ever found, or because she is a direct mother of all humanity in a simple family line. Her importance is more subtle and more profound. She makes visible a form of life that had been almost impossible to imagine clearly before her. In the Afar, even the silence has scale. The heat rising from the ground blurs distance. The open sediments hold colours that shift from cream to rust to grey. Fossils weather out as if time has loosened its grip by accident. But nothing about this story is truly accidental. The same volcanic violence that once buried landscapes also made them datable. The same tectonic forces that fractured the region also helped expose its old layers. The same dryness that makes the land feel severe helps reveal what wetter country might conceal forever. Lucy's survival into the present is a chain of unlikely events. A body must come to rest in the right place, be covered quickly enough, mineralize slowly enough, spared from total destruction, lifted or exposed at the right moment, and then noticed by someone who understands that a small, pale fragment on the ground may belong to a creature from a lost branch of the human past. So the story begins not with the fossil in a drawer, but with the land that releases her. It begins with ash, erosion, heat, and stone. It begins with an ancient rift where Africa is opening, and where the past, by chance and violence and patience, opens with it. Somewhere inside those exposed beds lies the outline of a life that ends millions of years before history begins. When that outline is finally seen, it will be given a nickname that travels around the world. But before Lucy has a name, before she becomes an icon, before she changes textbooks and museum halls, she's only a scattered presence in the Afar earth, waiting for the moment when a human eye recognizes another kind of human beginning. By the time the fossil appears, the people looking for it are already trained to expect almost nothing. That is one of the quiet truths of paleoanthropology. The great discoveries later seem inevitable, as if the earth has placed them in a dramatic arrangement for history to find. But in the field they usually arrive after heat, disappointment, sore eyes, and many ordinary fragments that lead nowhere certain. In November 1974 at Hadar in Ethiopia, the International Afar Research Expedition is working through exactly that kind of landscape: dry slopes, exposed sediments, gullies cut by erosion, and the constant possibility that a surface no one noticed yesterday may reveal something today. The team is not wandering blindly. They know the region is important. They have already found fossils that suggest the Afar might preserve a deep and complicated record of early hominins. But knowing that a place is promising is very different from knowing where, in all that broken ground, one of the most famous skeletons in science is waiting. The morning does not begin as legend. Donald Johanson, then a young paleoanthropologist, is out with graduate student Tom Gray. They are surveying an area that has already been looked over before, the kind of detail that later gives the discovery its slightly improbable quality. Fieldwork is often like this. A slope can be crossed once and reveal nothing, crossed again under a different angle of sunlight, after a little more erosion, with attention falling on one small patch of ground. And the same slope changes. What survives in the record is not only the fossil, but the moment of noticing. The eye must separate bone from stone, pattern from clutter, ancient anatomy from ordinary debris. In a place like Hadar, the surface is full of shapes that invite false hope. Pebbles can imitate teeth. Broken rocks can resemble fragments of joint. Most are dismissed after a closer look, but every so often, the earth gives something with a curve that belongs unmistakably to life. At first, the discovery is small. A fragment of arm bone appears, not a full skeleton rising from the ground, not a cinematic body laid neatly in stone. It is just enough to stop the walkers. Then another piece comes into focus. Nearby, there are more fragments. A bit of skull, a portion of thigh bone, a vertebra, a piece of pelvis. The recognition grows not as one sudden revelation, but as a tightening circle of attention. The fragments are not scattered randomly across miles. They are close enough to suggest that they may belong to the same individual. That possibility changes everything. Hominin fossils are precious even when they are tiny. Teeth alone can carry enormous information. A jaw can redraw a species boundary. But a partial skeleton is another order of discovery. A skeleton links parts of the body together. It allows scientists to ask not only what a species was, but how one body worked, how it stood, how it walked, how its limbs balanced, how its proportions fit into a real life. This is the moment when the survey day becomes something else. The researchers can see that the fragments are hominin and that they are old. They cannot yet know all the arguments that will follow. They cannot yet know how many museum displays, documentaries, journal articles, classroom lectures, and public debates will grow out of the bones. In the field, the first problem is practical and urgent. The fossil must be protected. Its position must be recorded. Every piece matters. Because context is fragile. A fossil pulled from the ground without its setting loses part of its meaning. The sediments around it, the exact location, the relationship between fragments, the other fossils nearby, the layer in which it rests, all of these details become part of the evidence. A famous fossil is not only famous because of what it is famous because it is found carefully enough to remain scientifically useful. The team marks the place, searches the surrounding surface, and begins the patient work of recovery. The site will be catalogued as AL288-1, a label much less memorable than the name the skeleton will soon receive. But in scientific terms, the label is essential. It belongs to the Hadar locality system, a way of fixing the discovery within a landscape that contains many fossil-bearing areas. Under that label, the bones enter science. Under another name, they enter culture. But on that day, before the legend forms, AL288-1 is a cluster of ancient remains emerging from a slope. The excitement must be balanced by discipline. It is possible to damage what has survived for millions of years in the space of a careless minute. The skeleton is not complete, yet it is astonishingly rich. Roughly 40% of the body is represented, an extraordinary amount for a hominin this old. The skull is fragmentary, which means that Lucy will not give science the kind of face people often crave from ancient fossils. There is no full cranium staring back from deep time. Instead, much of her importance lies below the head, parts of the pelvis, leg, arm, spine, ribs. And other bones preserve a body plan that is more revealing than a face might have been. This is one of the lesser-known ironies of Lucy's fame. She becomes a global icon, yet not because she gives us a complete ancient face. She becomes iconic because she gives us posture, proportion, and movement. She shows the architecture of a small-bodied hominin whose brain remains modest, while the rest of the skeleton carries unmistakable evidence that upright walking is already deeply rooted. As the bones are collected, the ancient individual begins to become visible through absence. There are gaps everywhere, missing pieces, broken edges, distorted fragments, questions that cannot yet be answered. Still, the pattern is strong enough to feel uncanny. Here is not an ape in the ordinary sense. Here is not a human in the modern sense. Here is a creature from an in-between world that is not truly in-between at all. Because evolution does not move along a straight corridor from primitive to advanced. It branches, experiments, preserves old functions while reshaping new ones. AL288-1 belongs to a lineage adapted to its own world, not to a rough draft made only for the sake of later humans. That distinction matters, although it is often lost when famous fossils are turned into icons. Lucy is not a stepping stone with bones. She is evidence of a successful way of being alive. Back at camp, the meaning of the discovery begins to expand. Field camps are practical places, equipment, dust, food, maps, notes, and exhaustion. Yet they are also where scientific caution first meets human excitement. The team knows they have found something rare. The fossils age will be refined through the geology of Hadar, especially the volcanic layers that help date the sediments. The anatomy will need careful study. Comparisons must be made with other fossils from Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, and beyond. There will be debates over species, sex, locomotion, and evolutionary position. Scholars still debate parts of that story today, because a fossil can be both revolutionary and incomplete. But even at the beginning, the discovery carries a force that is hard to miss. A partial skeleton from more than 3 million years ago is not just another data point. It is a body from a chapter that had been mostly written in isolated teeth and jaws. The surprise is sharpened by the date. In 1974, the story of human origins is already active, contested, and full of important finds, but it still contains a major uncertainty about the order in which key human traits evolved. Did larger brains come first, giving early ancestors the intelligence to walk, use tools, and spread? Or did upright walking emerge while brains were still relatively small? Lucy will become one of the clearest answers yet found. Her skeleton suggests that bipedalism is not a late accessory of big-brained humanity. It is older, deeper, and stranger. The body begins changing before the head becomes recognizably human. The ground is entered before the mind becomes ours. No single fossil can explain the entire transformation, but this one shifts the center of gravity. That is why the morning at Hadar grows larger with every recovered fragment. The discovery is not merely old, it is positioned at a crucial place in the argument over what kind of creature stands near the root of the human line. Around the fossil, the Afar landscape remains indifferent. Wind still moves over the slopes. The sun still hardens the exposed sediment. Other bones remain hidden, perhaps for another season, perhaps forever. Yet something has changed. A small ancient body has crossed from stone into knowledge. The earth has given science not a complete answer, but a form strong enough to disturb old assumptions. Soon, AL288-1 will have a name people can remember. For the moment, it is still mostly a careful set of fragments, wrapped, recorded, and carried away from the gully where deep time has finally opened. The bones leave the slope with a field number, but field numbers rarely survive in the public imagination. AL288-1 is precise, useful, and almost impossible to love. It fixes the fossil inside the scientific record, tying it to a locality, a season, a body of notes, and a chain of evidence that can be checked and argued over. Yet the world does not come to know the skeleton as AL288-1. The world comes to know her by a name that begins not in a journal article, but in the charged, exhausted atmosphere of an expedition camp after a discovery too large to absorb quietly. That night, as the story is usually told, the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds plays in camp. The details have taken on the softness of legend, as all famous scientific moments eventually do. There is dust, celebration, disbelief, the strange afterglow that follows a day when the past has suddenly become less abstract. Someone begins calling the skeleton Lucy, and the name sticks with a force no formal label could have managed. It is short, human, almost intimate. It gives the fossil an immediate presence. A cluster of ancient bones becomes, in the public mind, a person who can be imagined. This is powerful and also dangerous. Names open doors, but they can also make evidence seem more complete than it is. Lucy, after all, is not a preserved individual in the way a mummy is preserved. She does not arrive with clothing, tools, hair, or burial goods. She does not bring a face that can be reconstructed with confidence from a complete skull. Her name is modern, accidental, and affectionate, not ancient. It tells us something about the people who found her, not about what she called herself or how her kind recognized one another. Even the use of she rests on scientific interpretation, especially her small body size compared with other fossils attributed to the same species. Many researchers accept that Lucy was probably female, but the evidence remains incomplete, and debates about sexing ancient hominin fossils remind us how careful one must be when a few bones are asked to carry the weight of identity. Still, the name does what names do. it pulls deep time closer. In Ethiopia, she's also known by another name, Dinknesh, often translated as "you are marvellous" or "you're wonderful." That name gives the fossil a different kind of gravity. Lucy is not only a global scientific icon, she's also part of Ethiopia's deep heritage, held within a landscape that has become central to the study of human origins. The contrast between AL288-1 Lucy and Dinknesh reveals the three worlds the fossil inhabits at once, in science. She is a specimen with a catalogue number and anatomical significance. In popular culture, she is Lucy, the small ancient figure who helped humanity imagine itself walking out of a distant past. In Ethiopia, she's also a national treasure, a reminder that the soil of the Afar carries some of the oldest known evidence for the human story. None of these names is false, but each frames her differently. The scientific identity comes into sharper focus only after the bones are studied alongside other fossils. Lucy belongs to a species called Australopithecus afarensis, a name that will become one of the most important in paleoanthropology. Australopithecus means southern ape, a term first used for earlier discoveries in southern Africa, though the name can be misleading if heard too casually. These were not simply apes in the modern sense, nor were they humans in miniature. They were hominins, members of the broader human line after the split from the lineage leading to chimpanzees and bonobos, though exactly how every branch connects remains a subject of careful debate. Afarensis links the species to the Afar region, anchoring the name in the land that helped reveal it. The species is not defined by Lucy alone. That is another point easily lost in the brightness of her fame. Afarensis is built from a larger fossil record, including material from Hadar and from Litoli in Tanzania, where footprints preserved in volcanic ash offer a separate and haunting line of evidence for upright walking. Lucy is the emblem, but she is not the whole case. The species lived for a long span, roughly from about 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago, though exact boundaries shift as discoveries are refined. It occupies a crucial stretch of time before the later expansion of the genus Homo, and it shows that a small-brained hominin could be both ancient and highly adapted. That combination unsettled older expectations. It suggested that the pathway toward humanity did not begin with a large brain commanding the body to rise. The body had already changed. When Lucy's discovery spreads beyond the field and the laboratory, the reaction is immediate because she offers something the public can grasp. A jaw fragment may be scientifically important, but it rarely captures the imagination of millions. A partial skeleton does. People can picture a body. They can compare it with their own. They can ask how tall she was, how she walked, what she ate, whether she climbed, whether she feared predators, whether she lived with others. Some of those questions can be answered partly, others can only be approached through inference. What survives in the record suggests a small adult, perhaps a little over 1 meter tall, with long arms relative to modern humans, a small brain, and a pelvis and lower limb anatomy that points strongly toward habitual bipedalism. But the public often wants a fully formed character, and science can only offer a carefully bounded reconstruction. This tension becomes part of Lucy's story from the beginning. The nickname makes her memorable, but the bones make her important. The legend says, "Here is Lucy, our ancient ancestor." The evidence says something more disciplined and more interesting here is a partial skeleton from a species close to the human line, showing that upright walking was established more than 3 million years ago in a creature with a brain still much closer in size to that of apes than to ours. She may not be our direct ancestor in a simple chain. Human evolution is not a ladder with Lucy standing neatly on one rung below us. It is a branching system, crowded with relatives, experiments, survivors, and dead ends. Even so, a afarensis remains one of the strongest candidates for a species close to the ancestry of later hominins, possibly including early Homo. Scholars still debate the exact relationships, especially as new fossils reveal more diversity in the late Pliocene. But Lucy remains a central reference point because her skeleton makes anatomy visible in a way isolated bones cannot. Her early impact is also emotional. She arrives at a moment when human origins research is becoming a public drama, not only a specialist pursuit. Newspapers, magazines, museums, and television can turn a fossil into a symbol almost overnight. Lucy becomes small enough to feel personal and old enough to feel cosmic. She compresses 3.2 million years into a body that can be measured on a table. That compression is part of her spell. People who might never read a technical monograph can understand that a creature this ancient, this small-brained, and this upright changes something fundamental. It means that the familiar human posture has roots in a world without humans. It means that before tools dominate the archaeological record, before firelight becomes part of daily life, before language leaves even the faintest possible traces, an ancient relative is already moving across the ground on two legs. Yet the deeper one looks, the less simple she becomes. Lucy is famous because she seems to make the past visible, but her visibility is partial. Her bones preserve form, not biography. Her name gives warmth, not certainty. Her species gives a category, not a complete evolutionary map. The careful work is to let her be both icon and evidence without confusing the two. The icon invites us in. The evidence asks us to slow down. Between them, a more honest story begins to form. A story of a fossil named by chance, studied with discipline, claimed by science and culture alike, and powerful precisely because she is not complete. She is marvelous not because she answers everything, but because the fragments that remain are enough to change the question. To see Lucy clearly, the bones are not enough. They must be placed back into the world that shaped them, and that world is easy to misunderstand because it does not fit the old image of a single endless grassland. The Afar of 3.2 million years ago is not simply the empty, sun-blasted place a visitor might imagine from the exposed sediments today. The land still belongs to the same restless rift system, but the living surface is more varied, more changeable, and more crowded than the dry fossil beds suggest. There are river margins where water gathers life around itself. There are wooded patches offering shade and fruit. There are bushy areas, open corridors, seasonal wetlands, and grassier spaces where grazing animals move in loose attention to rain and plant growth. The ancient landscape is not a stage built for one species. It is a shifting mosaic, and Lucy's kind survives by knowing how to move through its many edges. This is one of the reasons the simple savanna story no longer works. For a long time, upright walking was often explained as an answer to open grassland forest shrink. Ancestors come down from trees, they stand to see over tall grass, and the human story begins. There is clean drama to that idea, but the evidence has made it harder to keep. Fossils from Hadar and surrounding regions point to habitats that include woodland and more closed environments as well as open ground. Plant remains, animal communities, sediments, and chemical traces all suggest a world where ecological boundaries matter. Lucy's species is not forced overnight from forest into plain. It likely lives among transitions, and transitions are demanding places. They reward flexibility. Food appears in different forms across seasons. Safety changes from one patch of land to another. Water draws animals together, including animals one might prefer to avoid. the evidence remains incomplete. But the surviving clues suggest that A. afarensis is not a creature of one habitat alone. The air itself belongs to a planet in motion. During the Pliocene, global climates are changing, though not in a simple straight line. Africa's environments are responding to shifts in rainfall, temperature, vegetation, and tectonic uplift. The East African Rift is not merely a background feature, it helps create varied landscapes through elevation, basins, faulting, lakes, drainage systems, and volcanic activity. A living creature does not experience these as geological processes. It experiences them as the slope that must be crossed, the water that is available or gone, the edible plant that is ripe or absent, the shade that cools the body, the smell of carnivore, the sound of movement in brush. Deep time becomes ordinary pressure. Evolution acts through such ordinary pressures repeated beyond imagination. Lucy's world is also a world of watchers. Large carnivores are part of the ecosystem, though it would be misleading to turn every moment of her life into a chase. Predation is real, but daily life is not only terror, it is attention. Saber-toothed cats, hyena-like carnivores, large crocodiles near water, raptors, and other threats belong to the broader Pliocene setting. The exact predator community varies by place and time, and scholars still debate the details of particular fossil assemblages. But the general point is clear: a small-bodied hominin is not the dominant animal in this world. Lucy's kind is not armed with spears, not protected by fire, not sheltered by walls. Survival depends on social awareness, movement, caution, climbing ability where useful, and knowledge of where the landscape offers refuge. A patch of woodland is not just scenery, it may be food, shade, and safety at once. Among the animals around her are creatures both familiar and strange. There are relatives of modern antelopes, horses, pigs, elephants, giraffes, monkeys, and birds, though many belong to extinct lines or ancient forms. Some browse leaves and fruits, others graze. Their teeth, bones, and abundance help scientists reconstruct the environments they inhabited. This is one of the quieter powers of paleontology. Lucy's world is built not only from Lucy, but from everyone buried with her. A fossil antelope can say something about grass, a monkey can hint at trees, a hippo or crocodile can point toward water, rodents, birds, and snails can add their small testimonies. No single species tells the whole story, but together they create a chorus of habitat clues. The landscape becomes less like an empty backdrop and more like a living network. The plants themselves are mostly gone as bodies, but not as evidence. Carbon isotopes preserved in soils and teeth can distinguish broad patterns of plant consumption and vegetation, especially between plants using different photosynthetic pathways. The details are technical, but the meaning is striking. Ancient chemistry can reveal whether a landscape leaned toward trees and shrubs or more open grasses, and whether animals fed within certain parts of that plant world. In Lucy's time, the expansion of grasslands in many regions is part of a larger environmental story, yet the picture at any given site is mixed. What survives in the record suggests that early hominins were living not at the end of a forest world and the beginning of a pure grassland world, but in a landscape where many options existed side by side. That may be one reason a body combining upright walking with some climbing-related traits makes sense. It is not a contradiction if the world itself is mixed. The rhythm of life would have followed resources rather than calendars. Fruit, leaves, seeds, tubers, flowers, insects, and other possible food appear according to season and place. Water sources swell and shrink, Shade becomes valuable under heat. The body of afarensis is small, and small bodies lose and gain heat differently from large ones. The demands of moving on the ground under sun are not trivial. Upright posture may bring advantages beyond travel alone. It can reduce the amount of body directly exposed to overhead sunlight at certain times, lift the head into slightly cooler air, and free the hands for carrying food or other materials. No single explanation fully accounts for bipedalism, and no serious account should pretend otherwise. But in a patchy environment, being able to move efficiently between resources while still using trees when needed could offer a powerful combination. This world is ancient, but not primitive in the sense of being simple. Every animal in it is adapted to something. Every plant is engaged in its own struggle for light, water, reproduction, and defense. Lucy's species is one experiment among many, and it is successful for a very long time. Afarensis persists across hundreds of thousands of years, possibly close to 1 million, depending on how one draws the species boundaries. That longevity is easy to overlook because modern people tend to see the past as a march toward us. But Lucy's kind is not waiting for Homo to appear. It is living fully inside its own conditions. It sleeps, feeds, moves, watches, rests, reproduces, and dies in a world that has no awareness of future human beings. At Hadar, the sediments preserve that world in broken form. They do not give us a moving picture. They give fragments a tooth here, a limb bone there, a layer of ash, a channel deposit, a pattern of species. From these pieces, scientists build a careful reconstruction, always aware that ancient landscapes can vary across short distances and long time spans. Lucy may have walked through open spaces, but she was not simply a creature of open space. She may have climbed, but she was not simply an ape of the trees. She lived at the boundary of possibilities, in a place where climate, vegetation, predators, and terrain kept changing the terms of survival. That is the world behind the bones, not a barren desert of origins, but a living, unstable, resource-rich, dangerous, and deeply textured landscape where one small hominin body learned to move in a way that would echo far beyond its own species. By the time Lucy's bones begin to settle into scientific meaning, she's no longer standing alone in the dark. Around her, before her, and after her, other fossils begin to form the outline of a species. Australopithecus afarensis is not a name built from a single skeleton, even though Lucy becomes its most recognizable face, or more accurately, its most recognizable absence of a face. The species is assembled from scattered evidence jaws, teeth, skull fragments, limb bones, and footprints. Found across eastern Africa in places separated by distance but joined by anatomy and age, Hadar gives one part of the story. Letoli in Tanzania gives another. Together, they reveal a hominin that lives for an immense span of time, from roughly 3.9 million to around 2.9 million years ago, though the exact boundaries remain open to refinement as new fossils appear and old ones are re-examined. That long duration is important. Lucy's species is not a brief accident. It is a successful way of being alive. To meet Australopithecus afarensis properly, one has to set aside the habit of seeing ancient relatives as unfinished versions of ourselves. The word afarensis may sit close to the base of the human family tree, but the species is not a rough draft waiting for correction. It is a creature shaped by its own world, its own pressures, and its own compromises. Its members are small-bodied compared with the modern humans. Their brains are much smaller than ours. Closer in volume to those of living apes than to later Homo, their faces project forward more than a human face. Their jaws and teeth are robust in ways that speak to chewing demands very different from the softened diets of later people. And yet, below the head, the body carries one of the great transformations in primate history: habitual walking on two legs. This combination is what made afarensis so disruptive. It broke the old expectation that the brain must lead the body into humanity. In Lucy's species, the head has not yet become human in the way people usually imagine, but the lower body has already crossed a threshold. The pelvis is shortened and broadened compared with that of a quadrupedal ape. The thigh bone angles inward toward the knee, helping place the feet beneath the center of gravity during walking. The foot, as shown not only by bones but by the famous Litoli footprints, is adapted for a bipedal stride. The big toe is more aligned with the others than in grasping ape feet, and the footprint trails preserve the ghostly pressure of beings moving upright across wet volcanic ash. Those tracks are not Lucy's own footprints, but they belong to a world close to hers, and they turn anatomy into motion. For a moment, deep time does not give a bone, it gives a path. Still, this species remains difficult to classify emotionally because it mixes traits modern minds tend to separate. Australopithecus afarensis has long arms relative to modern humans. Its shoulders and upper limbs retain features that many researchers associate with climbing ability, or at least with an ancestry in which climbing remained important. Its fingers are curved compared with ours. Its body is not built like a long-distance runner, nor like a modern human child scaled down, nor like a chimpanzee simply forced upright. It is its own arrangement. Scholars still debate exactly how much time afarensis spent in trees, whether climbing was central to daily life or more occasional, and whether some traits are functional adaptations or evolutionary inheritances that linger after their original importance has faded. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness has kept the species alive in argument for half a century. The range of afarensis also matters. Fossils attributed to the species are known from Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya, showing that this was not a single isolated population living in one narrow valley. It occupied parts of eastern Africa across a long period marked by environmental variation. That range suggests flexibility, but not limitless flexibility. Afarensis does not spread across the globe. It remains an African hominin, rooted in landscapes of woodland, bushland, grassland edges, rivers, and volcanic regions. Its success is regional and ecological, not imperial. It survives by being well suited to the demands of its world, and that world is changing. The species is also marked by variation within itself. Some individuals are larger, some smaller. This has led to debates over sexual dimorphism, the degree to which males and females differed in body size. If the size difference was large, it may suggest social patterns in some ways unlike those of modern humans. But such interpretations must be made carefully. Body size variation can reflect sex, age, geography, nutrition, or even taxonomic confusion if more than one species is being grouped together. Paleoanthropology often has to work with a puzzle in which many pieces are missing, and several pieces may not belong to the same box. A jaw from one site, a foot bone from another, and a partial skeleton from a third can be compared. But comparison is not the same as certainty. The species is real in the scientific sense, but its edges are not drawn with ink. They are drawn with evidence, probability, and debate. This becomes even more important as new discoveries complicate the old picture. For many years, a Afarensis was often treated as the dominant hominin of its time, and perhaps the most likely ancestor of later Homo. It may still stand close to that role, but the late Pliocene is no longer as empty as it once seemed. Other hominins appear near the same broad time range, including forms that may represent different Australopith species and possible early members of Homo. Recent discoveries and analyses have made the family tree look less like a clean trunk and more like a thicket. Around the time when Lucy's lineage is living, other experiments in hominin life may also be underway. Some have different teeth, some may have different feet, some remain too fragmentary to name with confidence. No single fossil and no single species can carry the entire origin story by itself. Yet afarensis remains central because it is known well enough to anchor the debate. Lucy gives the species a body, the Laetoli footprints give it movement, the Hadar fossils give it a population, the longer fossil record gives it duration. That combination is rare. Many ancient hominins are known from a jaw, a few teeth, a crushed skull, or a handful of bones that leave too much open. Afarensis is still incomplete, but it is visible enough to become a reference point against which other fossils are measured. When a new jaw is found from the late Pliocene, researchers ask whether it resembles afarensis or differs from it. When a foot suggests a more grasping big toe, scientists compare it with the expectations built from Lucy's species. When early Homo appears, one of the great questions is whether it descends from something like afarensis, from afarensis itself, or from a related but still poorly known branch. That is why meeting Lucy's species changes the emotional scale of the story. Lucy is intimate one individual, one partial skeleton, one ancient body. Australopithecus afarensis is broader a population, a lineage, a long experiment in survival. It is possible to imagine Lucy walking through the Afar, but it is more accurate to imagine many generations moving through changing landscapes, inheriting bodies suited to both ground and tree, raising the next generation, finding food, avoiding danger, and leaving almost nothing behind except those rare cases when geology becomes merciful. Most individuals vanish completely. Their bones return to the earth without record. Their lives leave no trace in stone. Lucy survives because of a chain of accidents. But her species survives in science because enough accidents happened in enough places to reveal a pattern. And the pattern is profound. Afarensis shows that the human story begins not with sudden brilliance, but with endurance. It begins with bodies small enough to be vulnerable, brains not yet enlarged, hands not yet the hands of tool-making specialists, and feet already committed to the ground. It begins in landscapes where the future is not promised, where several hominin forms may be testing different ways to live, and where one successful species walks for hundreds of thousands of years before disappearing into the deeper branching of evolution. Lucy gives that species a name people remember, but the species gives Lucy her true meaning. She is not an isolated miracle. She is one marvelous individual from a vanished population that stood, walked, climbed, fed, adapted, and endured long before the world had any reason to expect us. The first shock of Lucy is not that she looks human. She does not. The second shock is not that she looks like an ape. She does not do that simply either. Her power lies in the way her body refuses the categories waiting for it. Look at one part, and the ancient animal seems close to the trees. Look at another, and the ground is already written into the skeleton. The familiar and the unfamiliar do not sit in separate halves of the body. They are braided through it, bone by bone. as if evolution has kept several older solutions while testing new ones at the same time. That is what makes Lucy so important. She is not a missing link in the cartoon sense, not a neat halfway point between chimpanzee and human, but a living arrangement that once worked in its own right. The pelvis is where the argument becomes unavoidable. In a quadrupedal ape, the pelvis is long and narrow, built for a body that spends much of its movement with the trunk angled forward and the limbs used in very different ways. In modern humans, the pelvis is shorter, broader, and reshaped around upright posture. Lucy's pelvis is damaged and incomplete, as fossils almost always are, but enough survives to show a body adapted to bipedal walking. The blades of the pelvis curve in ways that reposition muscles used to balance the body over one leg during a step. This is not a small detail. Human walking is, in a sense, a controlled fall repeatedly rescued by anatomy. Each time one foot leaves the ground, the body must keep the torso from tipping too far sideways. The muscles around the hip become part of that balancing act. Lucy's pelvis suggests that this balancing system is already present, though not identical to ours. Yet the pelvis also reminds us how difficult fossil interpretation can be. The bones were crushed and distorted after burial, and reconstructing their original shape requires judgment. Different researchers have argued over details of the reconstruction, especially how human-like or unusual certain features were. The broad conclusion remains strong. Lucy was habitually bipedal, but the exact mechanics of her stride, the width of her hips, the rhythm of her gait, and the degree to which she walked like us remain more delicate questions. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness matters because even small changes in pelvic shape can affect how one imagines the whole animal moving. Lucy gives an answer, but not a modern walking body simply placed in the Pliocene. The knee and thigh deepen the case. The angle of the femur helps bring the knee inward beneath the body, placing the feet closer to the center line during walking. This feature is familiar in humans and different from the arrangement in apes that do not habitually walk upright. Even before Lucy, other knee fossils had suggested ancient bipedalism, but Lucy linked that kind of evidence to a partial skeleton, making the pattern more persuasive. A knee alone can tell a story, but a knee connected to pelvis, spine, leg, and foot tells a stronger one. Her lower body is not a collection of random compromises. It is a working system shaped around life on two legs. The spine adds another quiet piece to the puzzle. Modern humans have curves in the spine that help balance the trunk over the hips. Lucy's vertebrae are fragmentary, but they suggest a body that carries itself upright, with the lower back playing a role in posture and movement. Again, caution is needed. Fossils do not preserve posture as a photograph. They preserve structures from which posture is inferred. Still, when the pelvis, femur, knee, vertebrae, and foot evidence are considered together, the conclusion becomes difficult to escape. Lucy's kind walks upright not as a trick, not as an occasional performance, but as a habitual way of moving across the world. Then the arms complicate the picture. Lucy's upper limbs are relatively long compared with modern human proportions. Her arms do not make sense as the arms of a creature that has entirely abandoned climbing. Features of the shoulder, arm, and hand have been interpreted as retaining climbing ability, though scholars still debate how much these traits reflect actual behavior versus ancestry. This is one of the most persistent questions about Lucy. Did she regularly climb trees? Perhaps to feed, rest, or stay safer at night? Or did her arms simply preserve old anatomical patterns while her daily movement was mostly terrestrial? No single explanation fully accounts for every feature. the most reasonable picture may be one of mixed ability, not a rigid either-or. A. Afarensis could be an effective biped on the ground while still using trees more than modern humans do. Evolution does not erase old capacities the moment a new one becomes important. Her hands are equally revealing because of what they do not yet announce. They are not the hands of later humans with the same degree of precision grip, tool dependence, and reshaped proportions. Yet they are also not meaningless appendages trailing behind a walking body. Curved fingers may indicate climbing or inherited grasping ability. The wrist and hand bones suggest a creature capable of manipulation, though not yet part of the later world of stone tools in the way early Homo will become. This matters because the popular imagination often wants one invention to explain everything. Standing up frees the hands make tools make brains, and the story runs forward. Lucy interrupts that tidy sequence. Her hands are free when she walks, but the archaeological evidence for regular stone tool-making comes later. The body opens possibilities before culture transforms them. The foot is one of the most emotionally powerful parts of the story, even when Lucy's own foot bones are not as complete as people might assume. Much of what is known about afarensis feet comes from other fossils and from the Letoli footprints, which preserve individuals walking across ash nearly 3.66 million years ago. Those footprints show a bipedal stride with a big toe aligned far more like ours than like the grasping toe of a chimpanzee. They do not prove every detail of Lucy's own walking, but they illuminate the species or a very close relative moving upright in real space. There is something almost unnerving about them. A pelvis can be studied as anatomy. A footprint feels like a moment. It is the record of weight passing through a surface, a body going somewhere. Lucy's skull fragments pull the story back from the temptation to make her too human. Her brain is small, roughly within the range expected for Australopiths, and much closer to apes than to later humans. Her face would have projected forward. Her jaws and teeth speak to powerful chewing, though not to the extreme specialization seen in later robust Australopiths. Here lies the great reversal she helped make famous. The body below the neck is already deeply committed to upright walking. While the brain has not yet undergone the dramatic expansion associated with Homo, this is one of the most important lessons in human evolution. Traits do not arrive as a package. There is no single moment when an ape becomes human. There are separate changes, staggered across time, shaped by different pressures, combining in different ways. Her proportions complete the strangeness. She is small, probably a little over 1 meter tall, with a light body compared with most living people. But smallness should not be mistaken for weakness in an evolutionary sense. A small body can be efficient, agile, and suited to a particular world. Her skeleton suggests a life lived close to the ground and the trees, close to heat, food, danger, and social company. Not a symbolic life of invention and memory as later humans understand it. What survives in the record suggests a creature adapted to movement through a varied landscape, not a creature waiting for history to begin. So the body that changed everything is not dramatic because it gives us a miniature human. It is dramatic because it shows how wrong that expectation is. Lucy's bones reveal a hominin with a small brain and an upright lower body, with climbing signals and walking commitments, with ancient jaws and newly arranged hips, with proportions that seem strange only because her way of life has vanished. She is neither ape nor human in any simple sense. She is Australopithecus afarensis, and the more closely her skeleton is studied, the more clearly it shows that evolution is not a straight line of improvement. It is a set of workable bodies, each answering the world it inhabits for as long as the answer holds. The old story wanted the head to lead. It imagined intelligence rising first, as though the brain swelled with some early human ambition, and then commanded the body to follow. Larger brains, sharper minds, better tools, upright posture, open landscapes. The sequence felt satisfying because it made human evolution look like the gradual awakening of thought. Lucy disturbed that order. Her skeleton shows something quieter and more physical. Long before the human brain becomes large, long before stone tools dominate the archaeological record, long before firelight becomes part of daily life, an ancient hominin is already walking on two legs with a body organized around that fact. The revolution begins not in the skull, but in the hips, knees, feet, and spine. This is one of Lucy's most enduring gifts to science. She helped make it impossible to treat bipedalism as a late achievement of a nearly human creature. Her brain is small, yet her lower body is committed to upright walking. That combination changes the question from when did intelligence make us stand to why did standing and walking become so important before large brains evolved. It is a more difficult question, and a better one. No single explanation fully accounts for this shift. Scholars still debate the original pressures behind bipedalism, partly because the behaviour is older than Lucy herself and must be reconstructed from fossils even more fragmentary than hers. But Lucy makes one thing clear upright. Walking is not the prize at the end of human evolution. It is part of the foundation. Walking on two legs seems ordinary only because human bodies are built around it so completely. In truth, it is an unusual solution for a primate. Most primates move through trees and across ground using all four limbs in different combinations. Some can stand or walk upright for short distances, but habitual bipedalism requires a deep restructuring of the body. The pelvis must support organs and balance the trunk. The spine must curve. The knees must carry weight under the body. The feet must become platforms for push-off rather than grasping hands for branches. Muscles must be repositioned. Balance must become automatic. Even the shape of the birth canal, the demands on the lower back, and the stresses on the joints become part of the bargain. Bipedalism is not simply standing up. It is rebuilding the primate body around a new relationship with gravity. Lucy stands at a crucial point in that rebuilding. She's not the first bipedal hominin known or suspected, but she's one of the most vivid early witnesses. Older fossils, from species such as Australopithecus and others still debated in their relationships, suggest that experiments with upright movement may stretch deeper into the past. Some of those earlier forms show mosaics even stranger than Lucy's, with feet and pelvises that do not fit modern expectations neatly. But Lucy's skeleton gives the story a body that can be studied in connected parts. Her pelvis, thigh, knee, and spinal evidence allow researchers to see habitual bipedalism as a functional system. That is why she becomes so central. She does not merely hint that walking happened. She helps show how much of the body had already been reorganized around it. The advantages of walking upright were probably multiple, not singular. It may have made travel between scattered food patches more efficient than certain forms of ape-like movement on the ground. It may have freed the hands to carry food, infants, branches, stones, or gathered materials, even before tool-making became regular and archaeologically visible. It may have helped the body manage heat under tropical sun by reducing direct exposure at midday and lifting the head and torso into slightly cooler air. It may have improved visibility over low vegetation in some settings, though that older explanation is too simple if treated as the whole answer. It may also have allowed feeding from branches while standing on the ground, reaching into shrubs or small trees without climbing fully into them. Each idea captures part of the possibility. None alone is enough. The landscape matters here, because Lucy's world is not a single open plain demanding one obvious adaptation. It is a mosaic of woodland, bushland, river edges, grassier openings, and shifting resources. In such a world, walking upright may be valuable not because trees vanish, but because trees, open patches, and food sources are separated in complicated ways. A body that can move on the ground while still retaining some mobility in the trees is not confused. It is flexible. What survives in the record suggests that afarensis lives in that zone of flexibility. Its body is not specialized for life exactly like ours. It is also not trapped in the anatomy of a modern chimpanzee. It is a different answer to a different world. Recent biomechanical modelling adds another layer to this picture. By reconstructing how Lucy's body might have moved, researchers can test possibilities that bones alone cannot fully reveal. Such simulations suggest that afarensis could likely run on two legs, at least in a basic sense, but not with the speed, endurance, or efficiency of modern humans. The difference appears to involve body proportions, muscle arrangement, and especially features such as the Achilles tendon and lower limb mechanics that later become important in human running. This is a subtle but powerful point. Lucy's kind is already bipedal, but it is not yet built for the long-distance running capacities associated with later Homo. Walking comes early. Efficient running, at least in the fully human form, comes later. That distinction helps remove another tempting myth. Upright walking does not instantly create the modern human athlete. Evolution proceeds through stages, compromises, and overlapping functions. Afarensis can be a committed walker without being a great endurance runner. It can move effectively across the ground without having the long legs, spring-like tendons, and heat-shedding proportions of later humans. Its bipedalism is real, but it is not ours in every detail. The evidence remains incomplete, especially because muscles, tendons, and movement patterns do not fossilize directly. Yet the bones allow enough inference to show that the history of locomotion is layered. First comes a primate body reorganized for upright walking. Much later comes the particular human package of long legs, narrow hips, arched feet, elastic tendons, and endurance movement across large distances. The brain, meanwhile, waits. That's not to say nothing important is happening inside the head. Afarensis has the sensory world, social awareness, learning ability, and behavioral complexity of a living primate adapted to a demanding environment. A small brain is not an empty brain, but it is not the large, energetically expensive brain of later Homo. Brain expansion will come through its own pressures and pathways, tied perhaps to diet, tools, social life, ecological flexibility, development, and other forces scholars still debate. Lucy shows that when that later expansion begins, it does not begin from a four-footed ape suddenly deciding to become human. It begins from an already upright hominin lineage. The body has prepared the stage before the brain changes the play. This reversal gives Lucy her quiet drama. She stands against the idea that human uniqueness began with thought alone. Before the great symbolic worlds, before art, before language leaves any recoverable trace, before the deliberate shaping of stone becomes common, before the large human brain burns through calories at its remarkable rate. There is posture, there is balance, there is a small body placing one foot before the other across East African ground. The change seems humble, almost mechanical, but it alters everything that can follow. Upright walking changes what the hands can do, how the landscape is entered, how far resources may be linked, how bodies carry, reach, display, rest, and move together. Lucy does not explain why bipedalism began, and she should not be made to carry that burden alone. The roots are older than her, and every new fossil complicates the story. But she shows that by 3.2 million years ago, the experiment has become a way of life. The head has not yet become ours. The hands have not yet transformed the world. The tools, fires, migrations, languages, cities, and histories remain far ahead. Yet the ground has already been claimed in a new way, a small Australopith body. Vulnerable and successful, moves upright through a changing landscape. And in that movement the human story takes one of its earliest decisive forms. A body built like Lucy's does not belong to a single surface. That is one of the most important things to hold in mind when imagining her life. The ground matters deeply. The bones of the pelvis, knee, and lower limb make that clear. But the trees have not vanished from the story. They remain present in the shoulders, arms, fingers, and in the landscapes her species likely inhabited. Lucy's world is not divided neatly into a forest above and a plain below, as if evolution forced a clean choice between branches and dust. It is a world of crossings, edges, and returns. The most realistic image is not of a creature who abandons the trees forever, nor of one who only pretends to walk on the ground. It is of a small hominin moving between possibilities, using the earth as a pathway and the trees as food source, shelter, lookout, refuge, or resting place when conditions allow. This mixed life has been one of the most persistent debates surrounding Australopithecus afarensis. Some researchers emphasize the strong evidence for habitual bipedalism and argue that Lucy's species was already primarily terrestrial, walking efficiently enough that climbing was no longer central. Others point to long arms, curved fingers, shoulder features, and certain limb proportions as signs that climbing still mattered. The evidence remains incomplete because behavior does not fossilize directly. A bone can show what movements were possible, likely, efficient, or inherited, but it cannot replay an afternoon. It cannot show whether Lucy climbed every day, only in certain seasons, mostly for food, mostly for safety, or less often than her anatomy might suggest. The body gives probabilities, not a diary. Still, it is easy to see why trees would matter. A small-bodied hominin in a landscape with large carnivores has good reasons to value height. This does not mean every night is a scene of panic, or that life is ruled only by fear. Wild animals do not survive by living in constant emergency. They survive by knowing routines, distances, familiar routes, useful places, and the changing moods of their environment. A tree is not merely an escape. It can be a sleeping platform, a source of fruit, a place to rest in shade, a way to reach flowers, leaves, nests, or insects, and a vantage point in broken country. If Lucy's group knows certain trees well, those trees may form part of the map of daily life as surely as water channels and feeding grounds do. But climbing with a bipedal body is not the same as climbing with the body of a chimpanzee. Lucy's anatomy suggests compromise. Her lower body is not optimized for grasping branches with the feet. The big toe in afarensis, especially as suggested by the broader fossil record and footprint evidence, is far more aligned with the other toes than in apes that use the foot as a grasping organ. That alignment is a powerful signal of commitment to walking. Yet the upper body retains features that could assist in climbing. This combination may seem awkward from a modern human point of view because humans have become so specialized for ground travel. But evolution does not seek elegance by our standards. It preserves arrangements that work well enough. Afarensis may have moved through trees in ways unlike any living ape, and unlike any human climber. Its climbing may have been cautious, powerful, and close to trunks, not graceful swinging through high canopy. There is a lesser-known detail here that makes the debate especially interesting. The same anatomical feature can carry more than one meaning. Curved fingers, for example, may indicate frequent grasping and climbing, but they may also preserve an inherited form from ancestors who climbed more often. Long arms can be useful in trees, but they do not prove a life dominated by trees. Shoulder orientation can suggest overhead movement, but fossil distortion and comparison with modern species complicate interpretation. Paleoanthropology often works in this grey zone. A feature points somewhere, but not always with the certainty one wants. This is why Lucy remains scientifically alive. She is not a solved diagram. She is a body at the centre of a continuing argument about how ancient adaptations overlap. The daily rhythm of such a creature would likely be shaped by energy. Walking, climbing, feeding, resting, and staying alert all costs something. A small body cannot waste effort endlessly. If food is scattered, ground travel becomes important. If edible resources are above shoulder height, climbing or reaching becomes important. If water is far from a feeding patch, walking links the two. If shade is limited, movement must be timed and measured. Lucy's kind probably knows the landscape through repetition, where certain plants grow, where the ground is exposed, where footing is uneven, where animals gather, where trees stand close enough to provide options. What survives in the record suggests a creature adapted not to one heroic behaviour, but to many ordinary decisions repeated across generations. In such a life, upright walking is not always dramatic. It may be most important when nothing spectacular is happening. Afarensis moves from one feeding place to another. It carries something in the hands. It pauses near shrubs. It crosses a stretch of open ground. It follows others along a familiar route. It stands briefly to reach. It changes direction at the sound or scent of another animal. The hands remain available. And that availability matters even before the archaeological record fills with tools. Hands can carry food. Hands can steady the body on branches. Hands can gather, pull, strip, hold, and touch. Later humans will transform free hands into instruments of technology. But in Lucy's world, the value is probably more immediate and practical. The hand is useful because the day is full of small tasks. Rest is part of the story too. Ancient life is often imagined only in terms of survival struggle, but every animal must conserve energy. The heat of the day may slow movement. Shade becomes a resource. Social spacing matters. A group can feed loosely while remaining aware of one another. Brief contact, grooming, and proximity may maintain bonds, though the exact social behavior of afarensis cannot be reconstructed with confidence. Modern primates show that social life can be complex without language or tools in the human sense, and it is reasonable to infer that Lucy's species had social awareness, recognition, and learned behavior. But there is a boundary here. We do not know their calls, gestures, emotional range, or group structures in detail. The evidence remains incomplete, and any vivid reconstruction must stay tethered to that fact. The ground itself is not a flat laboratory. Walking through Lucy's world means dealing with slope, mud, ash, loose sediment, roots, rocks, stream edges, and vegetation. The mechanics of bipedalism are often discussed as though the animal is moving across a smooth surface, but real landscapes are uneven. A body that can walk upright must also recover balance, step around obstacles, climb low inclines, descend banks, and move through patchy cover. The mixture of arboreal and terrestrial abilities may have helped in exactly such conditions. A fallen trunk, a steep bank, a branch, a rocky rise, a narrow path near water. These are not separate worlds. They are one continuous environment requiring a flexible body. This is where Lucy becomes more than an anatomical specimen. She becomes a way to imagine an extinct mode of living. Modern humans are so ground-bound that trees often feel optional, decorative, or distant. For Lucy's kind, they may have been woven into the geography of survival. Yet the ground was no longer merely a place crossed awkwardly between trees. It had become a primary arena of life. That duality is the heart of her form. Her species carries the memory of branches and the promise of long terrestrial history in the same skeleton. It is not halfway to us. It is fully itself, living in a vanished balance. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of this part of the story. Evolution does not always replace one life with another in a clean cut. It often layers new habits over old capacities, then lets time and pressure decide what remains. Lucy's body stands in that layered moment. Her feet and knees speak of ground. Her arms and hands whisper of trees. Between them is a life spent negotiating both, not as contradiction, but as adaptation. In the Afar mosaic, where food, shade, danger, and opportunity shift across the day, such a body may have been exactly what survival required. Food is where the mystery becomes physical. It is one thing to imagine Lucy walking through a mosaic of woodland, bushland, river edges, and open ground. It is another to ask what kept such a body alive day after day. Every adaptation has a cost. Walking costs energy. Climbing costs energy. Watching for danger costs energy. Growing teeth, maintaining muscle, carrying a small brain, healing injuries. Staying warm during cooler nights and avoiding overheating under daytime sun all require calories gathered from a landscape that does not arrange itself for convenience. Lucy's species survives not by solving one grand evolutionary puzzle, but by answering the same simple demand every morning: find enough to eat before the body runs down. The most direct clues come from the mouth, because teeth are among the most durable witnesses in the fossil record. Enamel is the hardest tissue in the primate body, and long after bone has broken or vanished, teeth can remain, carrying shape, wear, chemistry, and microscopic damage from meals eaten millions of years ago. Australopithecus afarensis has teeth that are not exactly like those of living apes, and not like those of modern humans. The canines are reduced compared with the large projecting canines of many apes. The molars and premolars are relatively large, with thick enamel suited to repeated chewing. The jaws are strong, the face projects forward. This is not the delicate chewing apparatus of a creature living on soft processed food. It belongs to an animal that must deal with fibrous, tough, gritty, or seasonally difficult foods. But teeth do not speak in one simple sentence. Large molars and thick enamel were once often taken as signs that Australopiths regularly cracked hard nuts or ate extremely tough items. But later research has made the picture more nuanced. Microscopic wear on tooth surfaces can reveal the kinds of textures foods left behind shortly before death. Isotopes can suggest whether an animal's diet leaned more heavily on plants from shaded woodland settings or from more open grassy environments. Dental shape can show what a species was capable of chewing, while wear can hint at what it actually chewed. These are related but not identical. A body may be adapted for hard times without eating emergency foods every day. A powerful jaw can be insurance as much as a daily tool. For Lucy's species, the best picture is one of dietary flexibility. Afarensis likely ate a broad plant-based diet that could include fruits, leaves, seeds, roots, tubers, flowers, and other edible plant parts depending on season and habitat. Insect and small animal foods may have contributed occasionally, as they do for many primates. But there is no strong reason to imagine Lucy's kind as hunters in the later human sense. Stone tools are not clearly part of their regular world. Fire is far in the future. Meat, if consumed, would likely be opportunistic rather than the foundation of life. The evidence remains incomplete, especially because food rarely fossilizes in a way that can be tied to one individual. But what survives in the record suggests a hominin still deeply embedded in plant foraging. Recent work on other Australopiths helps sharpen this caution. Isotopic studies of Australopith fossils from southern Africa have found little evidence for heavy reliance on mammal meat in some populations living around 3 million years ago, pointing instead toward diets dominated by plants. Such research does not tell us exactly what Lucy herself ate in the Afar on a given day, and it does not exclude occasional animal food such as insects, eggs, or small opportunistic resources, but it does push against the old habit of making meat the immediate engine of every human trait. The rise of regular meat-eating and later hunting belongs to a more complicated story, one that becomes clearer with later Homo. In Lucy's world, survival may depend less on dramatic kills and more on patient knowledge of plants, seasons, textures, and places. A surprising detail lies in the chemistry of ancient enamel. Plants use different photosynthetic pathways, and those pathways leave different carbon signatures in the bodies of animals that eat them. C3 plants include many trees, shrubs, and woodland plants. C4 plants include many tropical grasses and sedges. When scientists analyze isotopes in fossil teeth, they can sometimes detect whether an animal fed mostly in woodland-type food webs, grassy environments, or a mixture. For early hominins, this shift toward more C4 resources in some lineages becomes an important clue to changing habitats and diets. Afarensis appears to occupy a world where mixed feeding is possible, though the exact pattern can vary by site and individual. This is not a menu written in stone, but it is a chemical shadow of vanished meals. The daily reality behind that chemistry may have been humble. A group moves through familiar routes near water and shade. Some individuals feed on fruit when available, stripping or biting with practiced efficiency. Others dig or pull at underground storage organs if they can be reached. Leaves and stems may be selected carefully, because not all green matter is worth the effort. Seeds may require chewing strength. Grit from dust or soil may enter the mouth, wearing teeth down over time. Seasonal scarcity may force the use of fallback foods that are less preferred but dependable. In many primates, fallback foods shape anatomy powerfully, because they matter most when preferred foods disappear. Lucy's thick enamel and chewing apparatus may reflect that kind of ecological insurance. The foods that save a species during difficult months can leave their mark on evolution, even if they are not the favourite foods of easy days. Foraging is also social, though the exact social life of Eos afarensis remains beyond direct recovery. Food patches can pull individuals together or spread them apart. A fruiting tree may become a temporary focus of attention. A patch of edible roots may require time on the ground. A river margin may offer resources and danger at once. The availability of food affects movement, group spacing, rest, and vulnerability. it also affects bodies across generations. Teeth worn early, jaws stressed by tough chewing, and bones shaped by nutrition all belong to the hidden economy of survival. Nothing in the fossil record suggests a life of abundance in the modern sense, but the long success of afarensis suggests that its strategy worked for hundreds of thousands of years. The mouth also reveals what Lucy's species was not. It was not yet the tool-dependent, cooking species that later humans become. Cooking transforms food, softens plant tissues, makes calories easier to extract, and changes the relationship between teeth, gut, and brain. Lucy's kind lives before that transformation. Every mouthful must be processed by the body more directly. Chewing is work. Digestion is work. Selection matters. A poor choice can waste energy or cause illness. A good choice repeated over generations becomes part of ecological knowledge, learned through attention, imitation, and experience. Such knowledge leaves almost no fossil trace, yet it may have been essential. So when Lucy walks through the Afar landscape, she's not simply moving through scenery. She's moving through a map of edible possibilities. The woodland edge is not just shade, it is fruit, leaves, insects, and safety. The open patch is not just exposure, it may hold seeds, tubers, or travel routes between richer places. The river margin is not just water, it is a gathering point for life, with all the risk that life brings. Her teeth carry the pressure of that world. They are small artifacts of hunger, adaptation, and endurance. They remind us that human evolution did not begin with grand inventions, but with bodies meeting the daily demands of food. Before the spear, before the hearth, before the field, before bread, before every cuisine that later humans will imagine, there is an Australopith jaw working patiently through the rough offerings of a Pliocene day. Lucy becomes famous as an individual, but the deeper one looks into Hadar, the more she seems to belong to a crowd. That crowd is not visible in the way a village is visible, with houses, hearths, pathways, and discarded objects arranged into the pattern of daily life. Australopithecus afarensis leaves no settlement plan behind. It leaves no carved symbols, no built shelter that can be confidently recognized, no burial place, no spoken memory. Its community appears instead through the most reduced evidence imaginable: bones, teeth, footprints, age patterns, body size differences, and the repeated fact that more than one individual of the same kind lived, moved, and died across the same ancient landscapes. Lucy is the doorway, but Hadar opens into a population. One of the most important discoveries after Lucy is a fossil concentration from Hadar known as AL. 333, often nicknamed the first family. The nickname is memorable, though like all nicknames in paleoanthropology it should be handled with care. It does not prove a literal family in the modern emotional sense. It does not show a household, a clan, or a group portrait frozen in stone. What it does show is remarkable enough. The remains of multiple Australopithecus afarensis individuals found in one area, representing different body sizes and ages. For a species often known from isolated bones, that concentration matters enormously. It gives researchers a glimpse not just of one skeleton, but of variation within a population. It suggests that Lucy's body was not an evolutionary oddity. She belonged to a living species with many individuals, each carrying the same broad anatomical pattern but with differences in size, age, and perhaps sex. This is where the fossil record begins to feel strangely social, even though it cannot give us social life directly. A single skeleton can be studied as an individual, a collection of individuals begins to raise population-level questions. How much did adults differ in size? Were males much larger than females? Or was variation more modest? Did the species live in groups like many primates? What might those groups have looked like? How did individuals stay close, compete, cooperate, or learn from one another? Scholars still debate these questions because the evidence remains incomplete, and because living primates offer many possible models, not one perfect key. Baboons, chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans all live socially, but their societies differ profoundly. A afarensis was not any of them. It was its own kind of primate, and its social world must be inferred carefully from anatomy, ecology, and comparison. Still, it would be almost impossible to imagine Lucy's species as solitary in any simple way. Most primates are social to some degree, and a small-bodied hominin living among predators, scattered food sources, and changing landscapes would likely benefit from awareness of others. Social life can mean many things before language, before fire, before tools dominate the record. It can mean recognizing individuals, staying near familiar companions, learning where food is found, watching the reactions of others, forming bonds through touch and proximity, and coordinating movement without anything like human planning. None of this fossilizes directly, but what survives in the record suggests that Lucy's life was almost certainly not lived in isolation. Her body moved through a world of other bodies. The Letoli footprints make this possibility feel especially vivid. Preserved in volcanic ash older than Lucy herself, they show bipedal hominins walking across a damp surface that later hardened into a record of movement. The footprints are not a photograph, and the exact relationship of the track makers to Lucy's own population is still discussed. But they are widely associated with Australopithecus afarensis, or a very close form. Their power comes from their ordinariness. These beings are not displayed as skeletons. They are moving. They are going somewhere. Some tracks suggest more than one individual crossing the same surface, and for a brief moment the fossil record stops looking like scattered death and begins to resemble life in progress. A body presses down, lifts, and continues. Another passes near it. Time closes over them. Millions of years later, the path remains. At Hadar, teeth and bones add a different kind of intimacy. Dental development can reveal age categories. Body size differences can suggest possible sexual dimorphism, though this remains difficult to interpret. If A. afarensis had strong dimorphism, some researchers have argued it might point towards certain forms of social competition or mating structure. Others caution that the fossil sample may combine variation caused by age, sex, geography, or even taxonomic complexity. The evidence does not allow easy certainty. Ancient bodies do not arrive with labels. A large jaw may belong to a male, or to a population with regional differences, or to a different point in development, or, in some cases, to a specimen that challenges how the species itself is defined. This uncertainty is not a weakness of the science. It is the honest condition of working with deep time. Younger individuals also appear in the wider world of afarensis, reminding us that these populations included the full cycle of life, not just adults preserved in museum displays. The famous Dakika juvenile, often called Selam, is much more complete than most fossils of her age and gives rare insight into growth and anatomy in Lucy's species. Mentioning such a fossil should not turn the past into sentimentality. Its importance is scientific development matters. A species is not only adult form, it is birth, growth, learning, dependency, maturity, and aging, though many of those stages leave little trace. The presence of younger individuals in the fossil record helps researchers ask how bodies change through life, when traits appeared, and how ancient growth patterns compare with those of apes and humans. Even here, what we can know is limited, but the reminder is powerful. Lucy's world was generational. Community also lives in the landscape itself. Afarensis individuals likely knew recurring routes, water sources, fruiting places, safe resting areas, and exposed spaces to cross with attention. This knowledge may not have been taught in words, but it could be learned through following, watching, repeating, and remembering. A group moving through a mosaic environment carries information in its habits. The same trees are revisited. The same watercourses shape movement. The same danger zones are approached with caution. The same seasonal foods draw bodies back when conditions are right. The fossil record does not preserve these routes, yet the anatomy and ecology make them likely. A walking hominin is not merely a moving skeleton, it is part of a social map. There is a surprising humility in this. The more famous Lucy becomes, the more one has to resist imagining her as a lone heroine of evolution. She was not walking toward us in splendid isolation. She was one member of a species that lived for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps close to 1 million, through countless ordinary days. Most of those lives left nothing, no trace at all. Even the individuals who became fossils were preserved by rare accident. The population itself is mostly invisible, and yet without that population Lucy would mean little. Evolution does not happen to icons. It happens to breeding populations across generations, through variation, survival, development, and changing environments. So the community around Lucy is both real and unreachable. It is real because fossils from Hadar and nearby regions show many individuals of her kind, not a single strange body alone in time. It is unreachable because bones cannot restore names, bonds, gestures, fears, preferences, or the small patterns of daily recognition that make social life feel alive from the inside. No single explanation fully accounts for how afarensis organized itself, how close its groups were, or how its members understood one another. But the outline is strong enough to change the scale of imagination. Lucy is no longer just a skeleton discovered on a slope. She's part of a vanished population moving through an ancient rift landscape, feeding, resting, watching, learning, and leaving behind only the rarest fragments of a social world that once felt complete to those who lived inside it. The longer Lucy is studied, the less she behaves like a simple answer. At first glance, this may seem strange. Few fossils have been examined more intensely. Her bones have been measured, compared, scanned, reconstructed, debated, displayed, and returned to again and again as new methods appear. Yet that is exactly why she remains scientifically alive. A fossil becomes important not because it ends argument, but because it makes argument more precise. Lucy did not close the case on early human evolution. She gave researchers a body substantial enough to fight over in useful ways. Even the question of who Lucy was, in the most basic biological sense, is more complicated than the public nickname suggests. She's usually described as female, and that interpretation is reasonable, especially because her small size fits the lower end of the body size range known from Australopithecus afarensis. But sexing a 3.2 million-year-old skeleton is not the same as sexing a living body. The pelvis, often useful for identifying sex in modern humans, is damaged and distorted, and afarensis is not shaped exactly like us. Size can help, but size is not absolute proof. A smaller individual may be female or young, or simply part of a smaller-bodied population. A larger individual may be male, or from another population, or perhaps even evidence that scientists are grouping too much variation under one species. Scholars still debate the degree of sexual dimorphism in afarensis, and that debate affects how confidently Lucy can be placed within male-female variation. The name Lucy gives her warmth and identity. The bones give probability, not certainty. Her age at death is similarly delicate. Lucy was not a tiny infant or an early juvenile. The skeleton and teeth suggest an individual who had reached maturity or was very close to it. But translating that into years is difficult, because growth patterns in Australopithecus afarensis were not exactly human, and not exactly like those of living apes. Estimates often place her around young adulthood, sometimes in the range of a little over a decade in biological age. But such numbers depend on comparisons with species that are not perfect matches. The evidence remains incomplete because growth is a process, and fossils usually preserve only a final snapshot. Lucy's bones show that she had lived long enough to carry the adult form of her species into the record, but they do not give a neat birthday, lifespan, or life stage in the familiar human sense. Then there is the argument that has followed her almost from the beginning: how did she move? The broad answer is secure. Lucy's species was habitually bipedal, her pelvis, femur, knee, and the wider evidence from afarensis make that difficult to deny. But broad answers often conceal fierce disagreements over detail. Did she walk with a stride close to ours, or with a more bent hip, bent knee gait? How efficient was her walking over distance? How much side-to-side motion did her body require? Did her shorter legs limit speed and range? How did her feet handle uneven ground? These questions matter because bipedalism is not one thing. A penguin, an ostrich, a human, and an australopith may all move on two legs, but the mechanics and consequences differ greatly. Calling Lucy a biped is the beginning of analysis, not the end. For a time, some reconstructions imagined early Australopith walking as awkward, crouched, or inefficient, a kind of halfway gait between ape and human. Later work strengthened the case that afarensis was more capable on the ground than that image allowed. The Letoli footprints, the angle of the femur, the pelvis, and the lower limb all support habitual upright movement. Yet recent modelling and biomechanical studies remind us that Lucy was not simply a small modern human. Her short legs, different muscle arrangements, and upper body proportions would have shaped her movement in ways we cannot observe directly. Simulation suggests she could probably run bipedally, but not with the speed or endurance of modern humans. That is not a failure. It is a clue. Her body belongs to an early stage in the long history of terrestrial movement, after upright walking is established but before the full later package of human endurance locomotion appears. The climbing debate is even more persistent because the evidence points in more than one direction. Lucy's lower body speaks strongly of ground walking, but her upper body refuses to let the trees disappear. Long arms, curved fingers, shoulder features, and other traits have been used to argue that afarensis retained meaningful climbing ability. Some researchers see these as signs that Lucy's species regularly used trees for feeding, resting, or safety. Others argue that such features may be evolutionary leftovers, inherited from more arboreal ancestors, but no longer central to daily behavior. No single explanation fully accounts for all the anatomy. A creature can be highly adapted to walking and still climb. A trait can be useful and inherited at the same time. The old habit of forcing Lucy into either tree ape or ground walker makes the fossil less interesting than it is. Her body suggests a world where those categories overlapped. One lesser-known source of argument comes from the shoulder. Lucy's shoulder joint and upper limb have been read by some as ape-like enough to indicate frequent overhead use, perhaps climbing. But shoulder anatomy is complicated, and fossils can be distorted by burial, damage, and reconstruction. The same bone can look more or less primitive depending on the comparison sample, the method, and the assumed range of normal variation. This is why scientific disagreement over Lucy is not merely stubbornness. It often emerges from the fact that a fragment of bone must be interpreted inside a chain of assumptions. Change one assumption about body size, distortion, muscle function, or species variation, and the living reconstruction shifts. Even her death has become a battleground of interpretation. For decades, Lucy's cause of death was unknown, and in the strictest sense it remains uncertain. Then high-resolution scans of her bones led some researchers to propose that she may have died after falling from a considerable height, perhaps from a tree, based on fracture patterns interpreted as injuries occurring around the time of death. It was a striking idea because it seemed to connect the anatomy debate to a final event. A creature still using trees meets a fatal accident. But the proposal was controversial. Other experts caution that fractures in ancient bones can be produced by geological pressure, trampling, sediment movement, erosion, or damage long after death. Distinguishing injury at the moment of death from breakage over millions of years is extremely difficult. The hypothesis remains intriguing, but not settled. What survives in the record suggests trauma-like patterns, but whether those patterns record the end of Lucy's life or the long violence of fossilization is still debated. This uncertainty does not weaken Lucy's importance. It deepens it. She's not a relic to be admired from a distance, but a test case for how paleoanthropology works under pressure. Every claim must pass through anatomy, geology, comparison, and probability. Every dramatic reconstruction must be held against the fact that the fossil is partial, ancient, and altered by time. Lucy teaches caution as much as revelation. She shows how much can be known from bones, and how much remains just beyond reach. By placing Lucy under scientific fire, researchers have not diminished her, they have made her more real. The public icon is smooth and memorable, a small ancient female ancestor who walked upright in Ethiopia. The scientific Lucy is rougher, more contested, and more powerful, probably female, probably adult or near adult, certainly small-bodied, clearly bipedal, possibly still a capable climber, and silent about the exact circumstances of her death. She survives as evidence, not as certainty, and that is why she continues to matter, in her broken pelvis, angled thigh, long arms, worn teeth, and disputed fractures. The human story appears not as a clean line, but as an argument written in bone. Lucy once seemed to stand near the centre of a fairly clean story. A small-brained hominin walked upright in eastern Africa more than 3 million years ago, and somewhere beyond that form, later, humans began to emerge. The picture was never truly simple, but for a time it was possible to imagine Australopithecus afarensis as a strong candidate for the main ancestral stock from which the genus Homo eventually grew. Lucy's species had the right age, the right geography, and the right mixture of traits ancient in the skull, transformed in the body, successful across a long span of time. But the fossil record has a way of punishing neatness. The more the ground gives up, the less the human family tree looks like a ladder. Older possible ancestors complicate the root of Lucy's story. Before afarensis, there are names that seem to stand in the dimmer light of the early hominin record: Sahelanthropus, Aurorin, Ardipithecus, and others whose exact positions remain debated. Some are known from frustratingly incomplete remains. Some preserve hints of upright posture or unusual dental anatomy. Some suggest that the split between the human line and the line leading toward modern chimpanzees and bonobos did not produce anything instantly human-like. The earliest hominins may have been strange mosaics of traits, with small brains, ape-sized bodies, and forms of movement that do not match any living primate perfectly. Lucy is not the beginning of the experiment. She is one of the first places where the experiment becomes visible enough to study in detail. Ardipithecus is especially important because it shows how misleading the old savanna to human story can be. Ardipithecus ramidus, known from about 4.4 million years ago, appears to have lived in woodland environments and shows a mixture of traits that challenge simple expectations, evidence consistent with some form of upright movement, but also a grasping big toe and strong ties to climbing. Its anatomy is not merely a primitive version of Lucy, and Lucy is not merely a primitive version of us. Instead, each form reveals a different adaptive world. Scholars still debate exactly how Ardipithecus relates to later Australopiths, but it makes one thing clear: bipedalism did not require a sudden abandonment of trees or an immediate move into open grassland. The roots of upright walking may lie in a more complex ecological setting than the older myth allowed. Then, around Lucy's own broad time range, the crowd thickens. For many years, afarensis was treated as the dominant known hominin in eastern Africa, from roughly 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago. That may still be partly true in terms of the fossil material available, but new discoveries have made the period look more crowded. Fossils attributed to Australopithecus diaremida, for example, suggest that another Australopith may have lived near the time and region of afarensis. Its jaws and teeth appear different enough that some researchers argue it represents a distinct species. Other scientists remain cautious because the sample is limited and fragmentary, and species boundaries in deep time are difficult to draw. Still, the possibility matters. If afarensis was not alone, then Lucy's world was not occupied by one inevitable ancestral form, but by multiple hominin experiments living near one another in space and time. The Bertel foot adds another strange clue, found in Ethiopia and dated to around 3.4 million years ago. It appears to preserve a foot with a more divergent big toe than expected for afarensis. If it belongs to a different hominin, then some relatives near Lucy's time may have retained a stronger grasping ability in the foot, while others, like afarensis, were more committed to terrestrial bipedalism. The evidence remains incomplete, and the foot is not attached to a skull or a full skeleton that would make classification easy. Yet its existence is a warning against assuming that all hominins of the period moved in the same way. On one ancient landscape, there may have been different bodies solving the problem of movement differently, some more tied to trees, some more adapted to the ground, all still far from modern humanity. Kenyanthropus platyops, from roughly 3.5 million years ago in Kenya, complicates the picture from another direction. Its flatter face and unusual combination of traits led some researchers to propose another genus living during the age of afarensis. Others have questioned whether distortion and damage make that interpretation too uncertain. The debate itself is revealing. A fossil skull crushed by geological time can become a test of how much variation scientists are willing to place within one species, and how much they recognize as evidence of diversity. No single explanation fully accounts for every fossil from this period. Some may belong inside a broad variable A, afarensis. Others may represent separate branches. The result is not chaos, but a thicket, a branching, overlapping landscape of relatives rather than a straight ancestral file. The thicket becomes even denser after Lucy's species fades. Later Australopiths appear with their own specializations. Some, often called robust Australopiths, or placed in the genus Paranthropus, develop massive chewing adaptations, large jaws, huge molars, flaring cheekbones, and crests for powerful chewing muscles in some species. They are not failures because they do not become us. They survive for a long time in their own ways, exploiting diets and habitats that rewarded their anatomy. Their existence warns against reading evolution backward. A species can be successful and still leave no living descendants. A lineage can flourish for hundreds of thousands of years and still vanish. The future does not crown the best creature in any simple sense. It only records which branches happen to continue. Early Homo enters this crowded scene like a blurred figure at the edge of the light. The earliest fossils attributed to our genus are fragmentary and debated, but by around 2.8 million years ago, evidence suggests that something recognizably closer to Homo is present in eastern Africa. This overlaps with the later end of the afarensis range, or follows close upon it, making the relationship tempting. Did Homo arise from a afarensis, from a population closely related to it? From another Australopith branch that has not yet been clearly identified, the honest answer is that scholars still debate the exact ancestor. Lucy's species remains a strong candidate for a close position near the ancestry of later humans, but the growing diversity of Pliocene hominins makes direct descent harder to prove. The family tree does not preserve birth certificates. Recent discoveries from places such as Lediguraru add to this sense of complexity. Fossils from the later Pliocene suggest that multiple hominin forms may have lived close in time, including early Homo, Australopiths, and Paranthropus-like lineages. This is not the world of one species replacing another in a clean handoff. It is a landscape where several relatives may overlap, each with different jaws, teeth, faces, bodies, diets, and movement strategies. Some branches may interact indirectly by using similar habitats or resources. Others may rarely meet. The fossil record is too sparse to reconstruct encounters in any vivid way. But the broader message is strong human origins unfolded in a crowded evolutionary neighborhood. Lucy's place in that neighborhood is both diminished and enlarged by these rivals. Diminished, because she can no longer be treated as the solitary queen of a simple lineage marching toward Homo. Enlarged, because her species becomes the anchor that helps reveal the complexity around it. Without afarensis, the scattered fossils before and after would float with less context. Lucy gives comparison. She gives a body against which other bodies can differ. She makes it possible to see that some hominins were more terrestrial, some perhaps more arboreal, some more specialized in chewing, some moving toward the anatomy later associated with Homo. The old ladder is gone, and that is a gain, not a loss. Lucy does not stand below us on a rung. She stands among relatives near branching paths, in a world where evolution is experimenting without foresight. Some branches vanish, some leave descendants, some are known from a single jaw or foot, some may still be hidden under sediments not yet exposed. What survives in the record suggests that the human story is not the rise of one chosen line, but the narrow survival of one branch from a once broader family. Lucy remains central not because she makes the tree simple, but because she helps us see how beautifully, stubbornly complicated it really was. A species that lasts for hundreds of thousands of years can seem almost permanent from a human point of view. Civilizations rise and fall in a few millennia. Languages can disappear in centuries. Cities can be abandoned within a lifetime. But Australopithecus afarensis endures across a span so long that it makes written history feel like a brief surface ripple. Generation after generation moves through eastern African landscapes, adapting to changing seasons, shifting habitats, predators, food sources, droughts, floods, and the ordinary pressures of life. Then, somewhere around the late Pliocene, the familiar fossil signal fades. Lucy's kind disappears from the record. There is no final scene, no last campfire, because fire is not yet part of their world in that way. No last city, no last inscription, no remembered defeat. Only a thinning of evidence, a point after which the bones are no longer found. That is one of the hardest things to accept about extinction in deep time. It rarely leaves a clean ending. The last fossil we have is almost never the last individual that lived. Fossil records are uneven, shaped by chance, erosion, burial, exposure, and discovery. A species may survive long after its youngest known fossil, or it may vanish before we think it does because older layers have been misread, or later material has not been found. The disappearance of A. afarensis is therefore not a single dated event in the way a historical collapse might be. It is a pattern seen through gaps. What survives in the record suggests that by roughly 2.9 million years ago, A. afarensis is no longer the dominant recognizable hominin form it once was, but the exact tempo of its decline remains uncertain. The world around it is changing. The late Pliocene is a time of environmental instability in Africa, with climatic shifts influencing vegetation, rainfall, and the spread or contraction of habitats. The balance between woodland, bushland, and more open grassland does not change everywhere at once, and it does not move in a simple one-directional march. Some places may become drier, some may become more seasonal. Lakes expand and shrink, rivers alter their courses, plant communities shift. Animal communities respond. For a creature like A. afarensis, adapted to a mosaic world and probably capable of using varied resources, change is not automatically fatal. Flexibility may have been one of its strengths, but flexibility has limits. If the patches become too far apart, if key foods become less reliable, if competition increases, if safe resting places or water sources shift, the daily map of survival begins to lose its old shape. Climate alone is too blunt an explanation. It is tempting to say that the environment changed and Lucy's species vanished, but that turns an intricate process into a slogan. Many species survive environmental change. Some move, some adapt, some shrink in range. Some split into new populations that eventually become new species. The afarensis itself may have been part of such branching. Its disappearance from the fossil record does not necessarily mean every descendant line ends. A population related to it, or even descended from it, may have contributed to later hominins. This is the difficulty of evolutionary disappearance. A species can vanish as a named form, while parts of its genetic and anatomical legacy continue in transformed descendants. Extinction and ancestry can overlap. Competition may have mattered, though it is almost impossible to prove in detail. As the late Pliocene progresses, the hominin landscape appears more diverse. Other Australopiths, early Homo, and later robust forms such as Paranthropus begin to occupy parts of the evolutionary scene. Some may use similar foods, some may move through similar environments, some may differ enough that they avoid direct competition most of the time. The fossil record does not show these hominins standing face to face over a feeding patch. It gives jaws, teeth, skulls, and dates. From those, scientists infer possible ecological overlap. If a afarensis relies on a broad set of plant foods, and another hominin lineage becomes better at exploiting certain resources, or if early Homo begins using tools and more flexible foraging strategies, the balance could shift. But no single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of Lucy's species. Competition is a possibility, not a courtroom verdict. Diet may be one of the hidden keys. A. Afarensis has robust chewing adaptations compared with modern humans, but it is not as specialized as later robust Australopiths. It seems to occupy a middle ground, flexible, plant-oriented, able to handle tougher foods when needed, but not built around the extreme chewing machinery of Paranthropus. In a stable mosaic, such flexibility can be powerful. In a more stressful or shifting environment, however, a generalist may be squeezed from several directions. More specialized feeders may do better with certain fallback foods. More behaviorally flexible hominins may expand into new strategies. Larger-brained early Homo, even if still modest compared with later humans, may begin to alter its relationship with food through tool use and wider ranging. These are possibilities, and scholars still debate their weight. The evidence remains incomplete because diet, behavior, and species boundaries all blur at the very moment the story becomes most important. There is also the question of reproduction and population size. A species does not have to be wiped out dramatically to disappear. It can decline quietly. Populations can become smaller and more isolated as habitats fragment. Groups can lose contact. Local extinctions can accumulate. A lineage that once ranged widely may retreat into pockets, then a drought, a disease, a shift in predators, a run of poor seasons, or simple demographic bad luck can finish what larger environmental pressures began. Deep time hides these small endings. It preserves the durable bones of rare individuals, not the slow arithmetic of shrinking populations. Afarensis may not have ended with catastrophe. It may have ended through many local failures, separated by time and distance, until there were no populations left that still fit the name. Yet disappearance can also mean transformation. Evolutionary species are not fixed objects. They are populations changing across generations. If some afarensis-like populations gave rise to later hominins, then the species did not simply vanish like a flame blown out. It changed beyond recognition, leaving descendants that scientists classified differently because their jaws, teeth, faces, brains, or bodies crossed new thresholds. This is especially relevant to debates over early Homo. The oldest fossils assigned to Homo appear near the time after a afarensis, and while direct ancestry remains uncertain, the possibility lingers. Lucy's kind may stand close to a branching point where one or more populations begin moving toward later human anatomy, while others continue along different paths or disappear. This makes the end of afarensis strangely unlike the collapse of an empire or the death of a last animal in a forest. There is no border to mark it, no final generation known by name, no moment when the species understands that its world is closing. From inside the lives of those animals, there is only the continuation of ordinary needs: find food, stay near others, move carefully, rest, reproduce, learn the landscape, survive another day. The great evolutionary transition is invisible to the beings living through it. They do not know they are late examples of an old form or early hints of a new one. Those are labels made by scientists millions of years later, looking backward through fragments. So when Lucy's species fades, it leaves behind an uncomfortable lesson. Success does not guarantee permanence. A body can be well suited to its world for an immense span of time and still lose its place when the world changes, when relatives diversify, when old strategies no longer carry the same advantage. Afarensis walked upright, endured, spread, and became one of the best-known early hominins in science. Then its recognizable form disappeared, but in that disappearance, something larger may have been opening. The same branching that ends one familiar species may lead toward others. The ground that no longer gives Lucy's kind begins, elsewhere and later, to give new jaws, new tools, new bodies, new possibilities. The silence after afarensis is not empty. It is the sound of the human family tree growing more crowded, more unstable, and more strange. Lucy's afterlife begins the moment her bones enter the world of human attention. A fossil can spend millions of years in silence, but once it is found, it begins a second existence measured by scientists, protected by institutions, argued over in journals, turned into casts, photographed, named, displayed, celebrated, doubted, reinterpreted, and carried into the imaginations of people who will never see the original bones. Lucy becomes one of those rare scientific objects that crosses the boundary between evidence and symbol. She remains a specimen, AL288-1, but she also becomes a kind of messenger from deep time, small enough to fit inside a laboratory drawer and large enough to change how modern humans picture their own beginning. Part of her power comes from timing. When Lucy is discovered in 1974, the public is ready for a new human origins icon. Earlier fossils had already shaken older ideas, from the Taung child to Zinjanthropus and other discoveries in Africa. But Lucy offers something unusually direct. She is old, remarkably complete for her age, and anatomically revealing. She is not only a skull or a jaw, she is a body. That body speaks to one of the most basic human recognition's posture. People may not understand every detail of pelvic anatomy or femoral angle, but they understand the difference between moving on four limbs and moving upright. Lucy makes the ancientness of that difference visible. She shows that the familiar human way of standing has roots in a creature with a very unfamiliar head. This is why she rewrites more than a scientific timeline. She rewrites a feeling. Before fossils like Lucy, it was easier for the public to imagine human evolution as a story driven mainly by intelligence, tools, and a steadily enlarging brain. After Lucy, that picture becomes harder to maintain. The body moves first, the brain comes later. This does not make intelligence unimportant, but it changes its place in the sequence. It suggests that some of the deepest transformations in the human line were practical, anatomical, and ecological, before they were intellectual in the usual sense. Hips, knees, feet, balance, and endurance of a certain kind prepare the ground for later histories. The mind that writes myths, builds cities, studies stars, and excavates fossils is descended from bodies that first had to solve the problem of moving through a dangerous, changing landscape. In museums, Lucy becomes a difficult kind of presence. The original bones are precious and fragile, and most people encounter casts rather than the fossil itself. Yet even a cast has force. It is small, almost startlingly so. Many visitors expect an ancestor to look grander, taller, closer to the heroic statues that human cultures make of themselves. Lucy refuses that grandeur. Her remains are partial, delicate, and broken. The ribs, vertebrae, pelvis, limbs, and fragments do not create the imposing image of a conqueror. They create something quieter, a body that survived long enough to become adult, died in a world without memory, and then outlived entire species, climates, rivers, and mountains as fossil evidence. This smallness is not a disappointment, it is the point. Human origins do not begin in monumentality, they begin in vulnerability. Her role in public imagination has not always been simple. Famous fossils are often pulled into stories that are too smooth. Lucy has sometimes been presented as the mother of humanity, a phrase that is emotionally powerful but scientifically imprecise. She may belong near the ancestry of later humans, but she is not known to be the direct ancestor of all modern people. She is one individual from one species in a branching evolutionary tree. New discoveries has made that tree more crowded, not less. Australopithecus afarensis remains central, but it is not alone in the late Pliocene. Other hominin fossils remind us that evolution works through populations, branches, and experiments, many of which leave only faint traces. Scholars still debate exactly where Lucy's species sits relative to early Homo. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness should not be hidden behind a beautiful phrase. Yet popular language also reveals something real people want kinship with the past. They want to know whether the bones in the case belong to us. Science answers with caution. Lucy is not human in the modern sense. She is not Homo sapiens, not Homo, not a person with culture as we understand it. But she is part of the hominin story, closer to us than to most life on Earth, and connected to the long evolutionary history from which humans eventually emerge. The kinship is not direct in the sentimental way people sometimes imagine, but it is profound enough. She belongs to the broader family of beings that make our existence possible. That is why her small skeleton can make time feel suddenly personal. In Ethiopia, Lucy's significance carries another layer. She's not merely a global fossil removed from place. She comes from the Afar, from Ethiopian ground, and the name Dinknesh reflects a national and cultural relationship to the discovery. The fossil is part of Ethiopia's scientific heritage and a symbol of the country's central role in understanding human origins. This matters because famous fossils can too easily become detached from the landscapes and communities connected to them. Lucy is not just an object in an abstract story of humanity. She's tied to a real place, to field teams, to Ethiopian institutions, to questions of stewardship, access, pride, and responsibility. The past may belong to all humans in one sense, but fossils are also embedded in particular soils and histories. Anniversaries have only deepened her status. 50 years after her discovery, Lucy is still not outdated. This is remarkable in science, where famous ideas can be revised into near obscurity as new evidence appears. Lucy has been revised, certainly. She has been complicated by new fossils, new methods, new debates over locomotion, diet, diversity, and evolutionary relationships, but she has not been replaced. Instead, she remains a reference point. Researchers still return to her because she preserves a rare combination of age, completeness, and anatomical meaning. Her importance has shifted from being a possible central ancestor in a simpler tree to being a crucial anchor in a more complex thicket. That is not a reduction of her legacy, it is a maturation of it. Modern technology has also changed how Lucy can be studied. High-resolution scanning, digital reconstruction, biomechanical modeling, comparative databases, and chemical analysis allows scientists to ask questions that were impossible when she was first found. A bone that once could only be measured by hand can now be examined internally without cutting it open. A joint can be modelled in motion. Fractures can be analysed in 3 dimensions. Muscle paths can be estimated. Isotopic patterns from related fossils and environments can enrich the picture of diet and habitat. None of these tools makes the fossil magically complete. They still depend on assumptions, comparisons, and careful interpretation. But they show that Lucy is not locked in 1974. She continues to produce knowledge because methods change around her. Her greatest legacy may be the discipline she demands from imagination. Lucy invites vivid reconstruction, but she punishes certainty when certainty goes too far. She allows us to picture a small Australopith walking through a mixed landscape, but not to know her thoughts. She shows bipedalism, but not every detail of gait. She suggests a species with social life, but not the shape of its bonds. She belongs near our evolutionary story, but not as a simple mother figure. This balance between intimacy and distance is what makes her endure. She's close enough to matter and far enough to remain mysterious. So Lucy rewrites us not by giving humanity a single origin point, but by teaching us to see origins differently. She shows that the human story is older than big brains, older than tools in their classic form, older than fire, older than language, older than everything people usually treat as the beginning of humanity. She reveals that our deep past is not a straight line of improvement, but a branching history of bodies under pressure, some successful for a time, most eventually gone. Her bones do not make us feel larger, they make us feel younger, stranger, and more contingent, and perhaps that is the deeper transformation. Standing before Lucy, one does not see the inevitable rise of mankind. One sees a small figure from the Afar earth, and understands that the road to us was never guaranteed. In the end, the story returns to the ground, not to the museum case, not to the famous photographs, not to the nickname that made a fossil feel almost familiar, but to the Afar sediments where a small body lay beyond memory for more than 3 million years. The land does not know that Lucy becomes an icon. It does not know that her pelvis will reshape arguments about walking, that her small brain will unsettle assumptions about intelligence, that her broken bones will travel through textbooks, documentaries, anniversaries, exhibitions, and scientific debates. The land only keeps what it can keep. It covers, hardens, cracks, lifts, exposes. It destroys almost everything and preserves almost nothing. Lucy survived not because the past wanted to be known, but because a chain of accidents held. That is the strange humility at the heart of deep history. For every Lucy recovered, there must have been thousands upon thousands of individuals whose bodies left no trace at all. They lived as fully as she did, moving through the same kind of light, heat, hunger, danger, and social closeness. But they are gone beyond recovery. Their bones were scattered, eaten, dissolved, crushed, washed away, or buried somewhere no erosion has yet opened. The fossil record is not a complete archive. It is a damaged shoreline where a few objects wash up from an ocean too large to see. What survives in the record suggests a world, but never restores it entire. The missing parts are not minor. They are almost the whole story. And yet the fragments are enough to change everything. A piece of pelvis shows a shift in balance. A femur reveals the inward angle of a knee. Teeth record the pressures of chewing and the chemistry of ancient plants. Footprints in hardened ash preserve the passage of bodies that did not know they were leaving evidence. Volcanic layers turn catastrophe into a clock. A partial skeleton found on a slope becomes a witness not only to one species, but to the method by which science reaches into time cautiously, comparatively, never with perfect certainty, but with enough evidence to make some claims strong and others impossible to defend. Lucy matters because she shows both the power and the limits of that method. She reveals a body, but not a voice, a way of moving, but not a memory, a species, but not every branch around it. Her importance has changed over time because science has changed around her. At first, she seemed to answer a major question with startling clarity. Upright walking came before large brains. That remains one of her greatest lessons, but later discoveries have made the world around her more crowded. Australopithecus afarensis no longer stands alone in an empty corridor leading toward humanity. Other hominins appear before, beside, and after it. Some known only from fragments that raise more questions than they settle. Australopithecus deiremida, the Bertel foot, Kenyanthropus, early Homo, Paranthropus, Ardipithecus, and other contested forms all remind us that human origins were not tidy. The evidence remains incomplete, and the more complete it becomes, the more branching the story appears. Lucy is not diminished by this. She becomes more valuable because she anchors the complexity. The same is true of her body. She's not a simple midpoint between ape and human. She's not a crude version of us. She's a creature whose body made sense in a world that no longer exists. Her hips and legs speak of habitual bipedalism. Her arms and fingers preserve ties to climbing. Her teeth and jaws belong to a life of tough choices in a plant-rich, seasonal landscape. Her small brain reminds us that being close to the human line did not yet mean being human in the familiar sense. She is not a promise of what will come. She is a successful answer to her own time, and like most successful answers in evolution, she eventually gives way to other questions. There is something almost unsettling about that. Modern humans often look backward and imagine inevitability. We see our own bodies, our cities, our language, our technology, and then arrange the past as if it were always walking toward us. Lucy resists that comfort. She belongs to a species that endured for far longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far, and yet it disappeared. Its success did not guarantee permanence. Its upright stride did not guarantee humanity. Its place near the root of our story did not make its future secure. Evolution does not protect a lineage because later minds will find it meaningful. It works without intention, through environment, reproduction, variation, survival, and loss. Still, the connection remains. When a person looks at Lucy, the recognition is not false. It simply has to be handled carefully. She is not us in the modern sense, but she is part of the broader history from which us eventually becomes possible. Her posture belongs to the deep ancestry of our own. Her world helps explain why bodies like ours did not arise all at once. Her incompleteness reminds us that identity is not only made from what is present, but from what is missing. The human story is built from gaps as much as from bones. Perhaps that is why Lucy continues to hold attention after so many decades. It is not only because she is old, or rare, or scientifically important. It is because she occupies a powerful emotional distance. She's close enough that her upright body feels like a mirror, and far enough that the mirror does not return our face. She asks modern humans to imagine kinship without possession, ancestry without certainty, and memory without words. Her skeleton is small, but the time around it is vast. Her body is partial, but the questions around it keep widening. Back in the Afar, erosion continues. New sediments crack open. New fossils may appear. Some may confirm parts of the story. Others may disturb it again, as good evidence often does. The ancient rift keeps moving, slowly enough to seem still, powerfully enough to remake continents. Somewhere under the dust, other bones may be waiting relatives of Lucy, rivals of Lucy, ancestors of later branches, or species not yet named. They do not wait for fame. They wait only for exposure, for chance, for a trained eye crossing a slope at the right moment. Lucy's final gift is not a completed origin story. It is the realization that origins are never as clean as people want them to be. They are layered, broken, contested, and alive with vanished possibilities. A small fossil body from Ethiopia shows that before humanity became a maker of worlds, it was first a fragile primate learning the ground. And in that long vanished movement, in the simple act of placing one foot before the other beneath an enormous Pliocene sky, the deep past leaves one of its quietest and most enduring traces. The story of Lucy does not end with certainty. It ends with a shape held against time, a pelvis, a femur, fragments of spine and rib, pieces of a body once warm, alert, and alive in a world that has disappeared completely. The rivers have shifted. The animals around her have vanished or changed beyond recognition. The climate has turned through cycles no individual could understand. Even the land that preserved her has been lifted, broken, and opened by forces far older than any human memory. And yet something remains. Not enough to restore a life, but enough to disturb the silence, enough to show that the human past is not a straight road, not a heroic climb, not a simple march from darkness into intelligence. It is a fragile branching of lives, most of them lost, most of them unnamed, many of them successful for a time and then gone. Lucy stands within that branching, small and incomplete, but unforgettable. Her bones remind us that survival is never guaranteed, and disappearance is not failure. Whole species can live well in their worlds and still leave only fragments. Whole landscapes can vanish and still speak through a tooth, a footprint, a layer of ash. What seems solid in one age becomes sediment in another. What seems ordinary in life becomes miraculous in preservation. There is comfort in this, but not an easy comfort. It is the comfort of scale. Human lives are brief, and human histories are young, but they are not rootless. Beneath every city, every language, every remembered name, there is an older story of bodies adapting to heat, hunger, distance, danger, and one another. Before the first written line, before the first monument, before the first village field, there were beings like Lucy's kind moving through the open edges of ancient Africa, carrying no knowledge of what they would one day mean. So the final image is not of a fossil behind glass, it is of the Afar in late light, the ground cooling after heat, the old sediments pale under the sky. Somewhere in that immense quiet, a small figure moves across a vanished landscape, upright but not yet human, familiar but unreachable. She takes a step, and then another. The dust receives the weight of her body. Time closes over the trace. Millions of years pass, and still, somehow, the shape remains.